He thought no one was watching when he kicked sand at the blind kid. Then Chuck Norris caught his foot in midair. 1 second, the beach was full of laughter. The next, it was dead silent. With just one hand, Chuck stopped the cruelty, and with one sentence, he dismantled the bully. What happened next turned a summer day into a story no one at Silver Strand Beach would ever forget. Welcome to Chuck Norris Heroics. Let's uncover what really happened. The late morning sun blazed down upon Silver Strand Beach, its golden rays painting the shimmering surface of the ocean and warming the fine, pale sand that stretched out like a welcoming blanket. Families dotted the shoreline, their colorful umbrellas creating a patchwork of shade, children's laughter mingling with the rhythmic crash of waves and the distant cries of gulls. The air smelled of salt, sunscreen, and the faint, sweet aroma of cotton candy drifting from a vendor further down the boardwalk. It was a picture of idyllic summer leisure, a scene where worries seemed to dissolve with the receding tide. Amidst this cheerful chaos sat Liam, a young man of 16, nestled on a thick towel near a cluster of smooth, sea-worn rocks. He was, in many ways, just another beachgoer, yet he experienced this vibrant world differently. Liam was blind, his world a tapestry woven from sounds, scents, textures, and the warmth of the sun on his skin. He held a braille book in his lap, its pages filled with raised dots, his fingers traced with a practiced grace. But more often than not, his head was tilted towards the ocean, a serene smile playing on his lips as he listened to the symphony of the sea. He could distinguish the sharp, excited yelps of children playing tag with the waves from the deeper, rumbling conversations of adults, the rustle of newspaper being turned, the soft thud of a volleyball. Each sound was a brushstroke, painting a vivid picture in his mind. He felt the fine grains of sand shift beneath his towel as people walked by, the subtle vibrations telling him of their proximity pace. His heightened senses made the beach a place of immense richness, a sensory feast that he savored with a quiet joy. Today, he was particularly enjoying the gentle caress of the sea breeze, cool and refreshing against his sun-warmed skin. He had come alone, as he often did, finding a sense of independence and peace in these solo excursions. His parents trusted his ability to navigate familiar environments, and Silver Strand was a cherished sanctuary. He wasn't entirely isolated, however. A few yards away, almost blending into the muted tones of a weathered driftwood log he leaned against, an older man sat reading a well-thumbed novel. He wore a simple, faded blue shirt, khaki shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat that cast his face in shadow. He appeared to be just another retiree enjoying the sun, his presence unremarkable, his posture relaxed. He turned a page with slow deliberation, his eyes occasionally lifting to scan the horizon, taking in the panorama of the beach with a calm, observant gaze. This was Chuck Norris, though no one around him seemed to register the fact, or if they did, they afforded him the quiet respect of anonymity he clearly preferred. He wasn't here for attention. He was here for the same reason as everyone else: a moment of peace, the feel of the sun, the sound of the ocean. He found a certain solace in the unpretentious honesty of such places, far from the echoes of a life lived in a brighter, louder spotlight. His attention, however, was not solely on his book. Years of training, of heightened awareness, meant he was always subtly attuned to his surroundings, the currents of human interaction flowing around him like the tides. He noted the boisterous group of teenagers who had just arrived, their laughter a little too loud, their movements a little too ostentatious, as they claimed a spot not far from Liam. There were 4 of them, 3 boys and a girl, their energy a stark contrast to Liam's quiet composure and his own settled stillness. The lead boy, broad-shouldered and with a cocky swagger, seemed to be the instigator, his voice carrying an edge of arrogance. Chuck made a mental note, a faint tightening around his eyes, the only outward sign, before returning his gaze to the printed words, though a part of his consciousness remained alert, a silent sentinel. Liam, sensing the shift in the beach's auditory landscape as the teenagers settled nearby, tried to focus more intently on his book, the intricate story of a young wizard navigating a world of magical creatures. He found solace in the structured narratives, the clear progression of challenges and triumphs. It was a world he could see, in his own way, more clearly than the sometimes unpredictable world around it. The leader of the newly arrived group, a youth named Marcus whose confidence far outstripped his years or wisdom, surveyed the beach with an air of proprietary disdain. His friends, a chorus of eager sycophants, mirrored his expressions, their laughter quick to follow his jeers. They spread their towels with a theatrical flourish, their voices cutting through the gentle murmur of the beach. Marcus's eyes, restless and seeking amusement, soon fell upon Liam. He saw not a person, but an opportunity, a target for the casual cruelty that often masqueraded as humor in his circle. "Hey, check out Bookworm," Marcus sneered, nudging one of his companions, a lanky boy named Kyle. "Think he can actually see those little bumps? Or is he just pretending to be smart?" Kyle snickered, a nervous, high-pitched sound. The girl in their group, Tiffany, giggled and covered her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of mean-spirited excitement and a flicker of apprehension. The fourth member, a heavier-set boy named Dave, simply grunted, his gaze following Marcus's. Liam heard the comments, the pointed direction of their voices unmistakable. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest, a sensation he had learned to manage but never entirely ignore. He kept his fingers on the braille page, his posture unchanged, hoping his lack of reaction would dissuade them. He continued to read, though the words on the page now seemed distant, the narrative overshadowed by the rising tide of their taunts. Chuck Norris, from his vantage point, registered the exchange. The tone was unmistakable, the intent clear. He lowered his book slightly, his gaze, still shaded by the brim of his hat, resting on the group of teenagers. He observed Marcus's posturing, the way his friends fed off his negativity, and the quiet, dignified stillness of the blind young man. He had seen this dynamic play out countless times in countless settings. The strong preying on the perceived weak, the pack mentality, the casual disregard for another's feelings. He remained silent, his judgment withheld, for now, allowing the scene to unfold, to reveal the true nature of those involved. Marcus, emboldened by Liam's lack of response, which he misinterpreted as fear or weakness, decided to escalate his game. "Maybe he needs some help feeling the beach," he said, a malicious grin spreading across his face. He scooped up a handful of dry sand and, with a flick of his wrist, sent it cascading over Liam's legs and the open pages of his book. The gritty grains settled into the grooves of the braille dots, a shower of tiny annoyances. Liam flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement as the sand struck him. He carefully closed his book, the grit scraping between the pages, and brushed the sand from his trousers. He still said nothing, his face a mask of forced neutrality. "Oh, did I get some on you?" Marcus feigned innocence, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "My bad. It's just so hard to aim when you're, not paying attention." His friends roared with laughter, the sound sharp and unkind, drawing a few disapproving glances from nearby beachgoers, though no one spoke up. A mother pulled her child a little closer. An elderly man frowned and shook his head before looking away. The silence of the bystanders was a heavy, complicit blanket. Chuck watched, his expression unreadable, but his stillness had intensified. The casual flick of sand, the laughter, the victim's quiet endurance. It was a tableau of petty tyranny. He knew that such incidents, if left unchecked, often grew, the bully feeding on the lack of resistance, the audience's fear or apathy. He also knew the value of patience, of choosing the right moment, the right way to intervene if intervention became necessary. For now, he was a witness, his presence a silent, unacknowledged weight on the unfolding drama. Liam took a slow, deep breath, trying to anchor himself in the familiar sounds of the ocean, to let the waves wash away the sting of their words and actions. He could feel the heat in his cheeks, the unwelcome blush of humiliation. He wanted to leave, to escape their orbit, but a stubborn part of him refused to be driven away, refused to let them see they had succeeded in unsettling. He would not give them that satisfaction. Marcus, far from being satisfied, seemed to perceive Liam's continued silence as a challenge to his dominance, a refusal to acknowledge his power. The thrill of an easy target was morphing into a perverse need to elicit a stronger reaction. "What's wrong, buddy?" he taunted, stepping closer, his shadow falling over Liam. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you just can't see who you're dealing." He punctuated the question with a light kick of sand, this time aimed more directly, some of it landing on Liam's arm and the side of his face. Liam instinctively turned his head away, the gritty particles stinging his skin. He could taste the salt and dust. The laughter from Marcus's friends was louder this time, more confident, as if the line of acceptable behavior had been successfully redrawn further into cruelty. From his position, Chuck Norris saw the distinct shift. The accidental nature of the first sand toss was gone. This was deliberate, a clear act of aggression, a blatant disregard for another human being's dignity. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The pages of his book lay still in his lap. His focus was no longer divided. He observed the subtle tremor in Liam's hand as he tried to brush the sand from his cheek, the forced composure in his posture. He also noted the growing discomfort among some of the other beachgoers. A young couple whispered to each other, casting worried glances towards Liam, but still no one intervened. It was always the way, he thought, a familiar ache of disappointment settling in. Courage was a rare commodity, especially when it required confronting a group. Marcus, high on his perceived power and the adulation of his small audience, decided to up the ante. He wanted a spectacle. "Hey, I bet he can't even tell if he's getting a tan or just covered in dirt," he yelled. Then with a wider, more theatrical motion, he bent down, scooped a much larger pile of sand, and drew back his leg for a forceful kick, aiming to shower Liam completely. He was laughing now, a harsh, ugly sound that grated against the peaceful backdrop of the waves. This was it. The line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. As Marcus's leg swung forward, his foot poised to send the sandy missile towards the unsuspecting blind teen, a shadow moved with astonishing speed. It was a blur of motion, economical and precise. Before the sand could leave Marcus's foot, before the laughter could fully erupt, a hand, strong and weathered, shot out and clamped around Marcus's ankle, freezing his kick midair. The grip was like iron. Marcus yelped in surprise and pain, his leg trapped, his body thrown off balance. He stumbled, hopping on his other foot, trying to wrench his ankle free, but the hand held firm. The pile of sand dropped harmlessly to the ground. Silence descended upon the immediate area, abrupt and absolute. The laughter died in the throats of Marcus's friends. Their smirks vanished, replaced by expressions of shock and confusion. Liam, who had tensed in anticipation of the sandy onslaught, heard the yelp, the sudden cessation of laughter, and felt the abrupt shift in the energy around him. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew something had changed. Chuck Norris stood fully now, his straw hat slightly askew, revealing eyes that were calm but held a glint of cold steel. He still held Marcus's ankle, his grip unwavering. "I think that's enough," Chuck said, his voice quiet, yet it carried a weight that cut through the stunned silence, resonating with an authority that needed no volume. Marcus, red-faced and struggling, finally focused on the man who held him captive. "Let go of me, old man," he spat, trying to inject bravado into his voice, but it came out reedy and thin. "Who do you think you are?" Chuck looked directly into Marcus's eyes, his gaze steady and unyielding. "I'm someone who doesn't appreciate bullies," he stated simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. The beach, just moments before a stage for casual cruelty, had suddenly become a courtroom, and a judge had just entered the scene. Marcus writhed, his trapped leg beginning to ache, his bravado rapidly deflating under Chuck's unyielding grip and piercing gaze. "My friends and I were just having some fun," he blustered, trying to regain some semblance of control, appealing to a sense of normalcy that his actions had clearly violated. "What's it to you?" Kyle and Dave, Marcus's erstwhile supporters, shuffled uneasily a few feet away. Their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a nervous apprehension. Tiffany looked pale, her eyes darting between Chuck and Marcus, her earlier amusement gone. "Fun," Chuck repeated, his voice still calm, but laced with an undeniable current of disapproval. He slowly released Marcus's ankle. Marcus stumbled back, rubbing his leg, his face a mixture of anger, humiliation, and a dawning fear. He was accustomed to being the one in control, the one dishing out intimidation, not receiving it. Kicking sand on someone who can't see you coming? Laughing at their expense? That's your idea of fun. Chuck's questions were not accusatory in tone, but they landed with the force of blows, each one chipping away at Marcus's flimsy justifications. "He didn't say anything," Marcus retorted, gesturing vaguely towards Liam, who sat listening intently, his head turned towards the sound of Chuck's voice. "If he had a problem, he should have spoken up. He shouldn't have to." Chuck stated flatly. Respect isn't something you only give when it's demanded. It's something you offer because it's the right thing to do, especially to someone who faces challenges you can't even imagine. Chuck took a step closer to Marcus, not aggressively, but with a deliberate presence that made the teenager instinctively take a step back. What you did was cowardly. You picked on him because you thought he was an easy target, because you thought no one would stand up for him. The other beachgoers, who had been observing from a distance, began to draw a little nearer, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama. Whispers started to ripple through the small crowd that was forming. Some recognized the quiet man who had intervened, their eyes widening in disbelief. Others simply sensed the gravity of the moment, the palpable shift in power. "Who do you think you are, anyway?" Marcus sneered, trying to rally his courage, though his voice trembled slightly. "Some kind of beach cop?" His friends remained silent, offering no support. They were looking at Chuck with a new kind of assessment, noticing the way he stood, the quiet confidence that radiated from him, the undeniable aura of someone who was not to be trifled with. Liam, meanwhile, was piecing together what had transpired. He understood that someone had stopped Marcus. Someone was defending him. A wave of gratitude, mixed with a lingering apprehension, washed over him. He remained still, not wanting to interfere, but his senses were keenly focused on the exchange. He heard the strength in the stranger's voice, a strength that wasn't about volume, but about conviction. Chuck ignored Marcus's taunt. His gaze swept over Marcus's friends, who flinched under his scrutiny. "And you," he said, his voice still low but carrying to each of them. "You think it's brave to stand by and laugh while your friend behaves like this? That makes you just as responsible." Kyle looked down at his feet, digging his toe into the sand. Dave shuffled uncomfortably. Tiffany bit her lip, looking like she wanted to disappear. The united front of the group had crumbled. "This is none of your business," Marcus finally yelled, his fear now fully morphing into desperate anger. "Just leave us alone." He took a step forward, posturing, trying to reclaim his lost authority. Marcus, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and acute embarrassment, balled his fists. His earlier bravado, though shaken, flickered back to life, fueled by the humiliation of being so easily subdued and publicly chastised. "You think you could just walk up and tell me what to do, old man?" he snarled, trying to project an image of toughness that his trembling hands betrayed. He glanced at his friends, seeking their customary support, but found only averted gazes and nervous shuffle. Kyle looked like he wanted the sand to swallow him whole, while Dave seemed to be studying a distant seagull with intense interest. Tiffany was biting her nails, her eyes wide and fearful. The solidarity of their pack had fractured under the quiet pressure of Chuck's moral authority. "I'm not telling you what to do," Chuck replied, his tone remaining infuriatingly calm, a stark contrast to Marcus's agitated state. "I'm pointing out what you've already done. There's a difference." He stood his ground, not in a confrontational stance, but with the unshakable solidity of a deeply rooted tree. This quiet immovability seemed to enrage Marcus further. "Yeah? Well, maybe you need to learn to mind your own business." With a surge of reckless adrenaline, Marcus lunged forward, swinging a wild, telegraph punch aimed at Chuck's head. It was an act of pure desperation, a clumsy attempt to reassert his dominance through physical aggression. Several onlookers gasped. Liam, hearing the sudden scuffling sounds and Marcus's aggressive shout, tensed, his hands gripping the edges of his towel. The punch, however, never came close to its intended target. Chuck moved with a fluidity that belied his age, a subtle shift of his weight, a slight inclination of his head. Marcus's fist sliced through empty air, throwing him further off balance. Before Marcus could recover or even comprehend what had happened, Chuck's hand shot out, not in a strike, but in a controlling motion. He caught Marcus's outstretched arm at the wrist and elbow, his grip firm but not crushing. With a smooth, almost imperceptible pivot of his own body, he used Marcus's own momentum against him, guiding the flailing teenager into a controlled spin that ended with Marcus stumbling awkwardly, landing hard on his backside in the sand a few feet away. It was over in a second, a masterful display of redirection and minimal force. There was no violence in the action, only an undeniable, irrefutable control. Marcus sat in the sand, stunned and winded, looking up at Chuck with a mixture of disbelief and a new, potent fear. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the stark realization that he was utterly outmatched. His friends stared mouths agape. The small crowd of beachgoers murmured, a collective sigh of astonishment rippling through them. Someone whispered, "Did you see that?" He didn't even hit him. Another voice, a little louder, said, I think that's Chuck Norris. The name hung in the air, electrifying the atmosphere. Chuck looked down at Marcus, his expression not of triumph, but of a weary disappointment. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit, he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. It's about having the character not to hit when you don't have to. It's about protecting those who need it, not preying on them. He then turned his gaze towards Marcus's friends. And loyalty isn't about blindly following someone into doing wrong. It's about having the courage to tell your friend when he is wrong. Kyle and Dave visibly shrank under his gaze. Tiffany looked on the verge of tears. The lesson was being delivered not just to Marcus, but to everyone present. The power of Chuck's intervention wasn't in the physical act, but in the moral clarity he brought to the situation, stripping away the bully's pretenses and exposing the ugliness of his actions for all to see. Chuck's words, delivered with quiet conviction, seemed to hang in the salty air, each syllable resonating with the onlookers. The whispers of his name grew more confident, spreading through the small crowd like a ripple in a pond. It is him, an older man confirmed to his wife, his eyes wide with recognition. I'd know that stance anywhere. Marcus, still sitting in the sand, looked completely deflated. The fight, the anger, the arrogance, all seemed to have seeped out of him, leaving behind a bewildered and thoroughly humbled teenager. He stared at his hands, unable to meet Chuck's gaze or the curious, judgmental eyes of the beachgoers. Chuck turned his attention fully to Marcus and his now subdued companions. What you did here today, he began, his voice maintaining its calm, steady cadence, wasn't just about kicking sand. It was about a lack of respect, a lack of empathy. You saw someone you perceived as different, as vulnerable, and you chose to mock him, to try and diminish him, to make yourselves feel bigger by making him feel smaller. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. That's not strength. That's a weakness, a deep one. He then gestured towards Liam, who had remained seated, listening with a mixture of awe and relief. This young man, Chuck continued, his voice softening slightly as he referred to Liam, was bothering no one. He was enjoying the day, just like everyone else. What right did you have to disrupt his peace, to make him a target for your so-called fun? Liam, hearing himself addressed with such dignity, felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the sun. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt seen, not as a victim, but as a person deserving of respect. Chuck then looked directly at Marcus. An apology is probably too much to expect from you right now, given your display. But I want you to think about what you did. Really think about it. Think about how it would feel if the roles were reversed, if you were the one being targeted, laughed at, made to feel helpless. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening, but his words carried an undeniable moral force. Marcus mumbled something unintelligible, his eyes still fixed on the sand. What was that? Chuck asked, his voice firm, demanding to be heard. Marcus looked up, his face still red, but the anger was gone, replaced by a sullen shame. I'm sorry, he muttered, the words barely audible. It wasn't a heartfelt apology, more a concession of defeat, but it was a start. Sorry to whom? Chuck pressed gently. Marcus glanced quickly at Liam, then back at the sand. To him, he mumbled. Chuck waited. He didn't let Marcus off the hook easily. He wanted the lesson to be learned, not just the confrontation to be over. Then perhaps you should say it to him, Chuck suggested, his gaze unwavering. The public nature of the confrontation, the presence of the crowd, Marcus's own friends witnessing his complete dismantling. It was a far more potent lesson than any physical punishment could have been. His reputation as the tough guy, the leader, was in tatters, exposed as nothing more than a bully's bluster. The onlookers murmured their approval. The sense of justice was palpable. The quiet hero had not only defended the vulnerable, but had also delivered a powerful public lesson in decency and respect. The tide of public opinion had turned decisively, washing away Marcus's fleeting moment of cruel triumph and leaving him stranded on the shores of his own misconduct. The weight of Chuck's expectation and the silent, watching eyes of the beachgoers pressed down on Marcus. He squirmed, the sand gritty and uncomfortable beneath him. It was one thing to mumble an apology to the imposing figure of Chuck Norris, quite another to face the person he had so casually tormented. He finally, reluctantly, pushed himself to his feet, brushing sand off his shorts with an exaggerated show of nonchalance that fooled no one. He avoided looking at Chuck, his gaze darting towards Liam, then quickly away. "Look, man," Marcus began, his voice still thick with a residue of defiance, but now tinged with a grudging compliance. I'm sorry. Okay, for the sand and stuff. He gestured vaguely. It was a clumsy, inadequate apology, lacking any real sincerity, but it was an acknowledgement, however flawed. Liam, who had been following the entire exchange with his heightened senses, tilted his head slightly. He could hear the insincerity in Marcus's tone, the lingering resentment. But he also heard the defeat. He chose not to respond immediately, allowing the silence to amplify the inadequacy of Marcus's words. Chuck didn't intervene this time. He let the moment hang, allowing Marcus to stew in the discomfort of his own making. He knew that true remorse couldn't be forced. It had to come from within, and Marcus was clearly not there yet. However, the public act of apology, however reluctant, was a step. It was a concession, a public admission of wrongdoing forced upon him by circumstance. Marcus's friends, Kyle, Dave, and Tiffany, stood a little apart, their earlier bravado completely extinguished. Kyle looked genuinely ashamed, his eyes fixed on the ground. Dave just looked lost, like a ship without a rudder. Tiffany was quietly crying, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The sight of their leader so thoroughly humbled, and their own complicity laid bare, had clearly had an impact. Is that all you have to say? Chuck finally asked Marcus, his voice neutral, giving him one last chance to show some genuine understanding. Marcus shrugged, a petulant, childish gesture. What else do you want me to say? Chuck sighed, a barely perceptible sound of disappointment. It's not about what I want you to say, son. It's about what you should feel. It's about understanding the impact of your actions. He let his gaze drift over the crowd, many of whom were nodding in agreement. This young man, he said, indicating Liam again, deserves to enjoy this beach, this day, without fear, without harassment, just like you do, just like everyone here does. With that, he seemed to consider the matter with Marcus closed, at least for the moment. He knew the seeds of the lesson had been planted. Whether they would take root was up to Marcus. He turned slightly away from the dejected teenager and his crestfallen friends, effectively dismissing them. The invisible shield of their group invincibility had been shattered. Marcus, sensing his dismissal, hesitated for a moment. Then, with a muttered curse under his breath, he turned and stalked away, his friends trailing behind him like chastened puppies. They didn't look back. Their departure was ignominious, a stark contrast to their loud, arrogant arrival. The crowd watched them go, their expressions ranging from contempt to a grudging pity for their youth and foolishness. The air on the beach seemed to lighten perceptibly as they retreated, the oppressive atmosphere of bullying dissipating like a bad odor in the sea breeze. The focus had shifted from the aggressors to the quiet dignity of the victim and the calm strength of his unexpected defender. As Marcus and his cohort disappeared down the beach, their retreating figures shrinking against the vast expanse of sand and sea, a collective sigh seemed to ripple through the remaining onlookers. The tension that had gripped the small section of the beach began to dissipate, replaced by a mixture of relief, admiration, and a lingering sense of awe. Several people began to applaud softly, a spontaneous expression of gratitude towards Chuck, who simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his gaze already shifting towards. He walked over to where the young man sat, his braille book still resting on his lap, dusted with a fine layer of sand. Chuck knelt beside him, his movements gentle, his presence reassuring. "Are you all right, son?" he asked, his voice much softer now, devoid of the steely edge it had held when confronting Marcus. Liam, who had been following the drama with an intensity that belied his calm exterior, turned his face towards Chuck's voice. A small, grateful smile touched his lips. "Yes, sir, I am now. Thank you." His voice was clear, holding no trace of fear, only a quiet sincerity. I heard what you said to them, and what you did. No one deserves to be treated like that," Chuck said simply, his eyes meeting Liam's unseeing ones with a look of profound empathy. He reached out and gently brushed some of the remaining sand from the cover of Liam's book. "Especially not for being who they are." Liam nodded, his smile widening a little. "I'm used to people not understanding, or sometimes they're just curious. But that was different. That was just mean." It was, Chuck agreed, and meanness, left unchecked, can grow into something much ugly. Sometimes, it needs a firm reminder of where the boundaries lie. An elderly woman, who had been watching the entire incident with her husband, approached them tentatively. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We just wanted to say thank you. What you did was very brave. We We should have said something ourselves, but she trailed off, her expression a mixture of shame and gratitude. Chuck offered her a reassuring smile. It's not always easy to step in, he said kindly, but it's always important. Even a kind word can make a difference. The woman's husband nodded vigorously. You're a good man, mister. Just a fellow beachgoer, Chuck replied, skillfully deflecting the implied question of his identity, though many now clearly recognized. He preferred the focus to remain on the principle, not the person. More people started to approach, a small trickle at first, then a steady stream. Some wanted to shake Chuck's hand, others simply wanted to offer words of support to Liam. A young mother with 2 small children gave Liam a brightly wrapped granola bar. My son, Davy, wanted you to have this, she said, her voice warm. Liam accepted it with a gracious thank you, his fingers briefly touching the child's small hand as he took the offer. He felt a warmth spreading through him, a sense of connection that had been absent just moments before. The actions of one group had tried to isolate him, but the actions of another, led by Chuck, were now enveloping him in a sense of community. Chuck stayed by Liam's side, a quiet, protective presence, allowing Liam to be the recipient of this newfound goodwill. He saw the subtle shift in Liam's posture, the way he sat a little taller, the genuine smile that now rarely left his face. The bully's attempt to diminish him had, in an ironic twist, resulted in him being seen and supported more fully. This, Chuck knew, was often the unexpected fruit of standing up to injustice. It not only stopped the bad, but it often brought out the good in others. The impromptu gathering around Liam and Chuck gradually thinned as people returned to their own spots on the beach. Their conversations now peppered with retellings of the story would undoubtedly become a local legend, embellished with each telling, but its core message of courage and respect would hopefully endure. Chuck remained with Liam for a while longer, ensuring the young man felt completely at ease. He didn't pry or ask too many questions, simply offered his quiet companionship. You handled yourself with a lot of dignity, Chuck said to Liam, breaking a comfortable silence. It takes a different kind of strength to stay calm when someone is trying to provoke you. Liam considered this. I've learned that getting angry doesn't really help, he replied thoughtfully. It just gives them what they want. My grandfather used to say, the best defense is a still mind. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man, Chuck commented, a hint of a smile in his voice. He was, Liam said, a touch of sadness in his tone. He taught me a lot about facing things, about not letting this, he gestured vaguely to his eyes, define what I can do. Chuck nodded slowly, understanding the depth of meaning behind Liam's words. He recognized the resilience, the inner fortitude that Liam possessed. It was a strength Marcus, with all his bluster and physical posturing, could never comprehend. That kind of strength, Chuck said, the kind that comes from within, is the most powerful kind there is. No one could take that away from you. As the sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Liam decided it was time to head home. He carefully packed his Braille book and the gifted granola bar into his bag. Thank you again, sir, he said, extending his hand towards where he sensed Chuck was sitting. For everything. You didn't have to do that. Chuck took Liam's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. Yes, I did, he replied simply. We all do when we see something wrong. It's what makes us a community. He then helped Liam to his feet and, without a word, walked with him towards the boardwalk, ensuring he navigated the sandy terrain safe. He didn't make a fuss. His actions were as natural and unassuming as his presence had been all day. As they reached the edge of the beach, where the sand gave way to the paved walkway, Liam paused. I don't even know your name, he said. Chuck smiled. It's not important. What's important is that you know you're not alone, and that there are good people in the world who will stand up for what's right. He gave Liam a gentle pat on the shoulder. You take care of yourself, young man, and keep reading those books. Knowledge is another kind of strength. With a final nod, Chuck turned and began to walk back toward his spot on the beach, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He moved with the same quiet, unhurried pace as before, as if the dramatic events of the afternoon had been but a minor ripple in the vast ocean of his experience. Liam stood for a moment, listening to Chuck's receding footsteps, a profound sense of peace settling over him. The fear and humiliation Marcus had tried to inflict felt distant now, overshadowed by the unexpected kindness and powerful intervention of a stranger. He knew he would never forget this day, not the sting of the sand, nor the ugliness of the taunts, but most importantly, he would never forget the quiet man who had stepped out of the shadows to defend him, a man who embodied a form of strength that Liam now understood more deeply than ever before. The beach began to empty as dusk settled, the vibrant colors of the day surrendering to the soft grays and blues of twilight. Chuck Norris collected his book and towel, his movements unhurried. He blended seamlessly with the departing beachgoers, just another man heading home after a day by the sea. No one approached him further. The earlier recognition seemed to have been tempered by a respectful desire to let him be. He didn't seek accolades, and the crowd, perhaps sensing this, afforded him his peace. As he walked towards the parking lot, he passed the spot where Marcus and his friends had been. The sand was scuffed and disturbed, a faint, lingering testament to their unpleasant presence. Chuck paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the area. He hoped, perhaps against odds, that Marcus might have learned something more profound than just fear of consequence. He hoped the boy might one day understand the hollowness of his actions and the true meaning of the respect he so desperately craved but so poorly understood how to earn. Liam, meanwhile, made his way home, his steps lighter than they had been on his arrival. The encounter had shaken him, yes, but had also, paradoxically, fortified him. The world could be unkind, people could be cruel, but it also held individuals capable of great courage and compassion. The stranger's intervention was a powerful reminder of that. He thought about the man's words. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about protecting those who need it. It resonated deeply with the lessons his own grandfather had tried to instill in him. When he got home, his mother noticed the faint redness still on his cheek and the few grains of sand in his hair. "Rough day at the beach, honey?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Liam hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "It had its moments," he said, "but it ended well. I met someone who reminded me that there's still a lot of good out there." He didn't elaborate further, not then. The experience felt too personal, too profound to be easily articulated, but he knew it had changed something within him. The memory of the strong, calm voice, the feel of the firm hand helping him up, the sense of being defended and validated. These were impressions that would not easily fade. In the days that followed, Liam found himself returning to the beach with a renewed sense of confidence. He still sat in his usual spot, still read his Braille books, still listened to the symphony of the ocean. But now, there was an added layer to his perception, an awareness that even in his unseen world, protectors could emerge from the most unexpected quarters. He never saw Marcus or his friends at Silver Strand Beach again. Perhaps they had found other places to frequent, or perhaps, just perhaps, the encounter had left a more lasting impression on them. As for Chuck, the incident was one of many in a lifetime spent observing and occasionally rectifying the small and large injustices of. It wasn't about seeking out trouble, but about not turning away when it presented itself, especially when the vulnerable were targeted. His actions on the beach that day were not for an audience, not for glory, but stemmed from a deeply ingrained code of honor, a quiet commitment to a set of principles that had guided his entire life. He knew that true strength wasn't measured in victories or accolades, but in the quiet moments of courage, in the decision to stand up when it would be easier to look away. The sun would rise on Silver Strand Beach again tomorrow. The waves would continue their timeless rhythm, and people would come and go. But for a few individuals, that ordinary summer day had become extraordinary, a stark reminder that even in a world that often seemed indifferent, acts of quiet heroism could still shine brightly, illuminating the simple, profound truth that protecting the dignity of another is one of the noblest strengths of all. And sometimes, all it took was one person, unassuming and observant, to draw a line in the sand and declare, with quiet finality, that it would not be crossed.